No, you don't want
Oh, I dog-eared the page.
Ah.
Like I've done this before. Okay.
Notice you got a Georgia license plate.
Yeah,
Oh,
sticking around.
official.
Yeah. So far, only my wife changed her license. I didn't do it yet.
Well, maybe we'll buy that Uber if you want.
I know. I know. I gotta get on it.
I notice everything.
You do. My father-in-law likes to say he's an observant Jew.
I like your toast.
Oh, thanks. They told me it was a goat. They said it was goat.
Goat?
Yeah,
Oh,
I wanted cowhide, but they
I
told me.
thought it was cowhide.
Yeah. Yeah,
Looks like cowhide.
yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Okay. It's hot, right?
Can we turn it down?
Yeah, do you mind?
Use some Britain or something.
Okay,
No, 48.
excellent.
If
If I had my choice, that's pretty much what I would set it to. Okay, so we got to do some review because last week was so exciting, so much fun programming. So we are very much in the weeds on the analogy and the analogy of analogies. And we started to sew it up a little bit and talk about, we looked at the two, maybe we could think of them as modalities of the teacher-student model in that, in the way they relate to the concept, to the information itself. And this hopefully, no promises, but I think this week we might even start putting this back into what we're trying to understand, which is the relationship between these two names of God, these two ways that God relates to creation, which we know of as Yud-Ke Vav-Ke, or Havaya is how we refer to it colloquially, which is connected with the name Adonai, and then Elohim as being the other name, which colloquially we refer to as Elohim, right? Because they're sacred names, we try not to use them in a casual context, so we just sort of slightly change them, but it's the same idea. So one of the last concepts that we mentioned was on page 150, this relationship between Or Yashar and Or Chayzer. And I think we probably touched before on the concept that Or, which is light in Hebrew, is the preferred metaphor of the Kabbalists for energy, for some type of transference, because of various properties about light that we use, that we can apply, that can help us, that it can help sort of sophisticate our understanding. So when we talk about these two lights, it's these two directions in how we relate to the concept. So we have the teacher is the Or Yashar, is the straight light, right? He has the concept. The concept is already clear to him. He, so to speak, owns the concept, right? It's integrated into his understanding. And so he understands it to its depths, to its core. Whereas the student is called Or Chozer, which means the reflected light, or the refracted light, or the light that bounces back, right? The returning light, literally. And that is that he starts with what the teacher gives him, which is the superficial and the external, a limited experience. And then through his own work of contemplation, of thoughtfulness, of exploring and probing the idea further, he ultimately gets to a place where he can own the concept the same way the teacher does. So they can have the same ownership over it. They can have the same integration, right? But the ways in which they go about it are opposite. The teacher starts off with the concept and then uses analogies to enrich the understanding or to enrich its transmission. And the student starts off with the analogies, and only at the end of it comes to the concept itself. So we ended off, I think, we ended off around 150, if my dog ear is correct, and we ended off on 151. And we said that there is in some way we can see how there is an equality to the different experiences. There's an equality between the student and the teacher, that while they come at it from opposite places, they ultimately have the same comprehension, the same ownership over the topic, over the concept. And we started referring this back to understanding a little bit more about the relationship between the student and the teacher as being this paradigm for Gilui and Hester, this paradigm of concealment and revelation. To say that for the student, for the teacher, he says on 151, the teacher doesn't experience a true concealment because the concept is never concealed for him, right? While he might use, right, while he employs certain tactics that present as a concealment, right? He presents certain elements of the concept in order to get the ball rolling, to begin that conversation, to facilitate the learning experience. At no point is the concept ever concealed for him. So for him, he doesn't experience a true concealment, right? And this is in some ways what we're going to say about when we're exploring this paradigm of the ways in which there is a concealment or a revelation. From God's perspective, we have to remember always that from God's perspective, it's all everything, right? Because it transcends the duality, it transcends the black and white or the bifurcated. And so therefore, with the student, there's also an element in which there is no concealment. And that's where we're going to pick up on page 157. 157 begins So we're going to take everything that we've said and start orienting it, start reintroducing it back to our understanding of how God relates to existence, right? And I think answer a little bit of like, why has this been so laborious and so and why have we gone into the weeds so much on this topic? So just as a brief introduction, we said before, we brought the teaching of the Vayada'ata, which is a medieval Kabbalist who says that just like Hashem, just like God has a capacity for the infinite, he has to have a capacity for the finite. If we were to say that God is only infinite and has no relationship towards finitude, then we would be limiting God in some way. So we have to say that in some element, there is a finite expression of God, just like there is an infinite expression of God. And so saying that means that there is some way in which we're going to talk about the Tzimtzum, right? The Tzimtzum being this contraction that created a vacuum, that created a negative space in order for there to be finitude, right? And all of these concepts that we introduced, that we talk about, are all from the perspective of the created experience, right? All from our perspective. And so it's important to realize that when we talk about juxtaposing or comparing and contrasting the Havaya, the Yud-Ke Vav-Ke element versus the Elikim element, this is all in the way we perceive God's presence, the way we relate to God, the way God is relating to us. But there is a more fundamental, essential truth, which is that it's all God all the time, and God is here, present, and totally unlimited, even within the finite, and that entire system of dualism is limited and does not limit him in any way. So we're going to pick up on page 157, which at the top says day 16, and let's see if we can make some heads or tails of this. Now that we've given this robust example, this extensive analogy about the nature of analogies, right, and the way in which a student and a teacher relate to each other, and all the intricacies of the student-teacher model as being the paradigm for Mashpia Makabo, the one on the giving side and the one on the receiving side. The Shem Elikim B'chinas Midas Hatzimtzum V'Hester Shemitzamtzem V'Master Al Shem Havaya B'chtei Sheyuchel Li Yisavas Elomus. That we said that our first question was that it seems like Elikim, the concept of concealment, the limitation on the revelation, right, restraining the revelation, it seems to be this almost linear process. It seems to be a two-step deal where you have first Havaya, you have first expression, and then that expression is contained, it's concealed, it's sort of directed and focused, and that is affected through Elikim, excuse me. We said before, if we remember back to our first question was, they seem to be equal and opposite forces, right? Shema Avaya, the concept of Yud-Ke Vav-Ke, in our estimation and how we perceive it, seems to be about Gilui, seems to be about revelation, expression, and Shem Elikim seems to do the opposite. And we said, okay, classically, that's sort of how we understand it, but at the same time, we also have the Zohar, the mystical tradition tells us they're the same. So we have to understand how they could be opposite and be the same, right? Those don't seem to jive. But before that, so let's just try to understand a little bit, what does it mean that they're working in equal and opposite forces, right? That we explained before that the source of revelation is Shem Havaya. Havaya represents all revelatory processes, all processes of expression. Hainu Gilui Ar B'chinas Bli Gvul, which we would say is represented by the infinite, right? The name Havaya is sort of a play in some ways on Haya, Haiva, V'Yiyah, past, present, and future, or was, is, and will be, right? That God is infinite, that he infinitely transcends the limitations of time and space. That's what Havaya sort of indicates to us. Whereas Elikim is on the other end of that spectrum. Elikim is the same numerical value as Hatava, as nature. It represents the natural order, which we perceive to be limited, right? The sun rises in the east and sets in the west every day. It does the same thing, that it's limited in that regard, so much so that we constructed an entire system of time around the hours of the sun, right? There are certain things, the limitations of the natural order are things that we rely on, that as being constants, as being always the same, right? So much so that we can, navigate, you can circumnavigate the globe just by using a sextant and the stars, right? These are things that are static and they're not changing. So that represents a limited experience. That's all connected with Elikim. So when it comes to the infinite expression, which we connote with Havaya, so this is based on the premise, like we said at the beginning, that Kabbalah likes the metaphor of light as a representation of energy because of certain qualities of light that help the metaphor. So one is that we have this principle that light is always connected to its source, right? Light can't be disconnected from its source. As soon as if we think of the light bulb and then the light is here, if we put something in between the light bulb and what we perceive to be the light in the rest of the room, then there would be no more light, right? If we put up a wall between the sun and us, there wouldn't be sunlight anymore, right? So the light is always intrinsically connected. It's always sourced and present in its source. And the other principle we have is that light is me'en hamar. It is a representative of the source. It contains within it the similar qualities of the source. So the sun has certain qualities that the light of the sun also contains. So when we use that principle to understand energy and the infinite energy of God, we say just like God is infinite, so too his light is infinite, which means that his expression is infinite. The light being the same or containing the same qualities as the light source is that if God is the light source and he is infinite, so too the light is also infinite. Right? Remember that this is all talking about the Havaya experience, the Yud-Ke Vav-Ke experience, which is about the infinite, right? So we're just trying to understand the mechanics of how infinity works. So just like the light source, which is God Almighty, God's essence is infinite, so too his expression is infinite, right? It wouldn't make sense to have an infinite God with finite expression, right? It's natural to being infinite would mean that the expression is also infinite, right? The novelty comes in when we say that he has to have a capacity for finite as well, right? That's a lot more radical in some sense. So if God is infinite and his expression is infinite, meaning the entire way that he is perceived, right? His expression is how we perceive it, essentially. So if that is also infinite, then there's no relationship between God and creation. There's no way to bridge that gap because there's the difference between finite and infinite is a quantum difference, right? It's a total paradigm shift, right? This is where this concept of tzimtzum had to be introduced, because to bridge the gap from finite to infinite is something that you can't contain infinite to a point where it begins to become finite, right? There's no point in which infinite transforms into finitude just through containers, just through limitation, right? You have to have a radical shift that is a quantum leap, that is tzimtzum, that is a total breakdown of the system in order for there to be a shift and to create the capacity for finitude. Since God is infinite and the worlds are finite, they're limited entities. So just like his expression is infinite, right? The Ein Sof is his expression, right? The light of the Ein Sof, the light that is Ein Sof, the light that is limitless. So just like the light is limited, just like he's limitless, the light is limitless. Both of those have no relationship with finitude. So there's no room for there to be any type of relationship there. But at the same time, for there to be, the last paragraph on 157, for there to be existence, what we perceive of as existence, finite existence, our existence, in order for that to exist, it has to be sourced in God, right? God is the true yesh, God is the true existence. Our existence is dependent upon his existence. So we have to be sourced in him. All of this has to be sourced in the essence of the divine in order for it to exist. So how do we bridge that gap? If we do a shakol pa'ula, hu al yedei isgalus keach ha'poel dafke. Like it's known that every action is an expression of the capacity of the actor, of the person doing the action, right? When you throw a ball, the ball flying through the air, it depends on how much force you put into the ball, right? Everything that we do, everything that happens is because of something that we do, right? Not to say that we're like this all-powerful thing, but when you kick something or you throw something or you draw something, right? If you drew a painting, if you made a painting, it's there because of the movements that you put in and the choices that you made and all of that. That's all your koach ha'poel, all your capacity to affect, your capacity to do, right? So the outcome, the action itself is totally related to your input. That's why the Kabbalists usually like the example of throwing a ball, right? Because especially if you throw a ball up in the air, as soon as it reaches the end of the amount of input that you put into it, gravity immediately brings it back down, right? There's no hang time where it just sort of sits up there in the air for a second, right? As soon as the input has expired, right? As soon as that kinetic energy, right, that you put into it is like completed, is done, is used up. So then gravity immediately pulls the ball back down. So just like the way we put ourselves into the ball that we throw, so too, when it comes to every pa'ula in this world, every pa'ula, every effect, every action that is related to the process of creation, that's all with God's action in it, right? But we still have to bridge this gap because God is infinite and this is a finite world. Because if you had just straight infinite input into the actions of this world, or that into the creation of this world, it would just make more infinite, right? If the input was infinite, then the result would also be infinite. But what we have right now is an input that is infinite and a result that is finite, right? This world is finite, existence is finite, but the input is still infinite. So we need to somehow square that circle, right? We have to bridge that gap at some point. Continuing on page 158. So this is all made possible by Shem Elikim, by the name Elikim. Elikim, as we said, indicates to us limitation, constriction, containment, right? The natural order that contains within it and that is limited to certain scientific principles, certain rules that we set our watch to, that we rely on, right? We all rely on gravity being the same force every day, right? Gravity doesn't fluctuate, it doesn't really change, right? We bank on that. That the Elikim system, or the mechanics of Elikim, what Elikim represents is containing and covering over, concealing the expression, the infinite expression of Havaya. So just like in the relationship between the student and the teacher, the teacher will withhold in some way or constrain or conceal the essence of the concept in order to convey only a superficial element of it, what he calls here an external element of it, right? A more baseline, simplistic understanding of the concept. But for the teacher, the essence of the concept is always present and is always apparent. So too, Elikim works in tandem with Havaya. Elikim works to conceal, to constrain in some way, the essence of the expression in order to facilitate only the external elements of it become expressed. And so in Kabbalah, what we talk about is that this process exists in the world of Atzilus. Atzilus is, according to Kabbalah, the highest world in the system of worlds. There are four main worlds that we understand. This world, this physical realm, is the world of Asiya, the world of action. There are three worlds that are higher, that are more spiritual, that are more God conscious. They feel themselves less, right? Whereas for us, our starting off point is our own existence, right? To have a Cartesian experience is only possible in this world, right? To say I think, therefore I am is only possible in this world, because it's only in this world that we start off with our own existence as being the only given, right? In the higher worlds, the given is God's existence, and their own existence is secondary. For us, our existence is a given, and we have to realize we have to go out of ourselves to experience, to perceive anything beyond ourselves, right? So in ascending way, the highest world is Atzilus, where there is essentially no sense of self, and there is all God consciousness. But it is still, and so it is in some ways infinite, it is in some ways totally godly, and it is in other ways finite. Atzilus is, I would say, in the corpus of Hasidus Chabad, of the Chabad philosophy and writings, Atzilus is like top three topics that is like trying to be understand in any given discourse. It is the focus in a lot of ways of what we're trying to understand, because it is the first place where there is God as oriented towards creation. And it is at the same time, the highest, the most godly that we can conceive of in some way. It's there's no shortage of things written about Atzilus that could do way more justice than what I'm saying now. But this is, so when it comes to Atzilus, Atzilus is the first expression or the first orientation towards creation, meaning that you have God and God's expression both being infinite, right? And this is how we would say maybe God on his own terms, so to speak. And then the shift that happens, the shift that orients towards there being an other, the first place that there is a sense of an other, a second element to the equation besides God that is finite by definition, is in Atzilus. That's the first place where we sort of identify that experience. Atzilus is the word that we use to identify that realm, that reality, right? Worlds, when we use the term worlds, it's obviously not speaking about physical places, right? These are spiritual dimensions. These are sort of stratas of consciousness or of conception. So in Atzilus, which is sort of like, if you take Havaya plus Elikim, then it equals Atzilus, right? In some ways, the first result of that marriage is Atzilus, is this reality that is finite and also in some ways contains elements of infinity, contains elements of being totally godly, but has division and distinction, right? That we're able to identify different spheres like Chachma and Chesed, that there is wisdom and kindness, that there are these different spheres, that there are different spheres, different modalities of operation, of relation, right? That we can begin to identify that this is kindness versus restraint, this is humility, this is dignity, right? Where this is the first place that we're able to sort of put words to different processes. This is all an Atzilus experience. So, which is to say that this is all brought about because there is in the metaphor, right? Remember that we're using this metaphor of light. The process of Havaya and Elikim interacting with one another creates the energy that is able to be, it works almost like the prism that allows us to see the different colors in the light, right? When light goes through a prism and it refracts the light, that we're able to identify the different colors that are all present within the light. So the prism doesn't affect the light in any specific way. It's just revealing what's already there, right? That the nature of light is that it's composed of all the colors. So in some ways too, the relationship between Havaya and Elikim, when they come together, when Elikim is able to constrain the expression of Havaya, it creates this element that is the first place that we can begin to draw any type of distinction or differentiation, which is the spheres. And because there is distinction and differentiation, so that means that it is the first place, so to speak, the first time that there is an orientation or there is some relationship between the infinite that is God's essence and the finite that is the world's, that is creation. If we say it a different way, Havaya and Elikim are these two processes that are manifestations or orientations of God relating to creation. And it is specifically in the union of the two of them, or in the relationship of the two of them, that there is space now for the opportunity for there to be a finite experience, for there to be an other. That the otherness that is created is born out of the relationship between Havaya and Elikim. And it's only at that point that there is a relationship between God and the worlds and the finite realm. That it is made possible only in the relationship between the two. That if it were all infinite, there would be no space for us. And if it would be all finite, then obviously there's not really anything to talk about. But the relationship between Havaya and Elikim, these two modalities of infinite, of beyond time and space. And within time and space, Havaya and Elikim, Yudke Vavke, and Elohim is where we find that Goldilocks moment that creates the possibility for creation. Yeah.
Okay, I finally get the different worlds, the spiritual. But how do we navigate, or how do we get to those? I mean, using these concepts you're giving us today seems to me to be correlated, but I can't quite make it exact.
Like, how do we go there? So the first answer is I don't really know. I can't say I've ever consciously been there. But I can tell you what I've seen. There are certain prayer books, Sidurim, that are written according with the contemplations or the meditations of Kabbalah, like expressly written in the prayer books. And they identify certain parts of the prayer service as being connected with certain realms. And the high point being the Shemona Esrei, the Amidah, the silent standing meditation prayer, where that's connected with Atzilus. I think that for a person who is initiated in the Kabbalistic meditation experience, then the Amidah presents as the opportunity to dial into that.
Thank you.
I think for most of us, we are so attuned, or we're so, like, our conscious state is so connected with the physical world that it's hard to conceive of what it means to be conscious in a spiritual realm. But I think that each one of us, if we reflect on certain experiences that we've had, something like the end of Yom Kippur, when you say Shema Yisrael, right? And we all say it out loud, and you've gone through 24 hours of fasting, and the world is all sort of hazy, right? Everything's just like you're just holding out for the Gatorade. But there's an experience at that moment where you just sort of like stop feeling yourself, and you get out of the physical orientation of consciousness. I think there are experiences like those which might mirror or echo or give us a glimpse into that reality. Yeah.
There's a commentary about the Giga too, the four rabbis that went into Paradise. Whole story, look it up, it's cool. One of the commentaries on it is that they didn't actually go into like higher worlds, but they entered a state of mind by meditating. There's through meditation of like different names of God, they were able to, because it was like a state of being, a mindset of what they entered, not like, so similar.
Yeah.
Probably just in a short format. Is it one of Hashem's names, the Elohim, which means concealment, and the other one's Havaya, which means
Revelation.
revelation? So how did Avram logically figure this out? You said the two marriages of the United States, how did he come to the conclusion logically that Hashem is possible?
Why does it have to be logically?
Even by faith.
I think that for regular people, I think that there is what the world presents is, or at least the concept of Elikim is that there is a natural order and there is a consistency to the natural order that we can rely on, and that we construct the rules, the laws of science around. But if you probe deeper, we can see that even the limitations of the natural order and the laws that govern it are ultimately divine, and that it is, like we said in the last mimer that we looked at, that it doesn't take faith to look at the world and see God, right? We said that's a knowledge experience, right? Because it's obvious and apparent that this world didn't just manifest, that it didn't just come out of its own development, right? The shortcomings of the theory of evolution, right? So there's no need for faith to deduce from the physical world that there is a creator that affected that creation, that put into motion that creation, right? So in that sense, I think it would be totally logical. It's totally within the realm of logic to look at the world and to say this world had to come from somewhere, right? And there had to be a creator to the creation, right? Similar to what we said of this idea that every action has the input of the actor in it, right? So I think that's all within the realm of Elikim, that's all within the realm of, in some ways, logic. When it comes to Avram's relationship, so Avram is being motivated as being driven totally out of love with somebody who was able to get past, if love and chesed, which is really what Avram embodied, is the opposite of gevura, of restraint, of concealment, then what Avram's ultimate focus was was beyond the limitations, beyond the natural order, beyond the godliness that presents naturally, which is all Elohim, which is Gevura, which is restraint and concealment, because he was a chesed person, so then he was able to, his orientation was towards the infinite, right? It was towards the Yud Kei Vav Kei. Now, obviously, there's also what the Torah talks about how he didn't know the name Yud Kei Vav Kei, right? Hashem tells Moshe that Shmi Havaya Le'nedaiti Lahem, I didn't tell the forefathers the name of Yud Kei Vav Kei. He says in Parshas Vayera, in the second parsha of Shmos, of Exodus. But I think for a person like Avram, we're told the forefathers were a Merkava, were a chariot, they were like a vehicle for godliness. So, and the classic explanation of that is, just as a vehicle is totally given over, is totally at the will of the driver, so to the forefathers were given over. They had that same commitment and sense of purpose to God, that they were just like a vehicle for God's will. So these were people who were incredibly spiritually aligned, right? So for a person like that, I think that it was the capacity to realize beyond even the godliness within the finite, but to realize that there's an infinite element as well, would also be accessible just from, a soul place, from meditation and reflection and exploration.
So, we can also explain from the context of the revealed and the concealed. Right, like you said, like Gevura is concealed and the Hesed is revealed. Can we then say like the stuff that's under, like below the tree of life, or like that too, like the Gevura is center, so it's a combination of received, revealed and concealed.
Sure.
Like called and has that word like concealed versus like that.
So in general, the spheres are, I think I've told you before that when it comes to the tree, we don't really, we're not, it doesn't feature so prominently in Chabad thought. But the idea of it broken down into 3 lines is very prominent. And so the entire right side is all about expression, whereas the entire left side is all about restraint. So everything that features on the right side has an element of expression to it, and the left side has an element of restraint to it. Any question? How do you mean?
Like the conscious being what is the material realm, and the subconscious being the driver, the main driver, which is the one that operates without you consciously doing it. So does that inherently the subconscious, not that I'm saying one power, but in a sense, it is.
So I think the soul is not comprised of the 10 spheres, but the soul expresses itself through the 10 spheres. And I think the sort of the meeting point of unconscious and conscious is the soul's expression into our thoughts and our thought, speech, and action, right? That's sort of what's a better way to say this? Like the soul operates through these 10 spheres, through these 10 modalities of intellect and emotions, which is conscious, but also can exist in the subconscious too, right? And the soul's interaction or the soul's engagement through, because there's like a unconscious element of the soul and a more conscious element of the soul, right? In Kabbalah, we typically break it, we say that there's 5 levels to the soul, but it's that there's 3 that are more conscious and 2 that are more subconscious or unconscious. So the essence of the soul is ultimately relating to a conscious experience through intellect and emotions, right? That's how we conceive of our existence and the world around us is through our intellectual and emotional experience. Certainly when it comes to interpersonal relationships, but really everything that we relate to in this world. And then we consciously express that through our thought, speech, and action. That's how we express that outwards, right? Even thought is a conscious process of relating to the world around us, even though it's still internal. So it's all in some ways sourced in an unconscious essence, because that essence, our essence, is that soul that is totally divine. That is, we're told, a piece of God that is intrinsically connected to God's essence above. Did that answer your question? Cool, I'll take it. Okay. And so, okay, so we have Havaya and Elikim, and we said that the Yesh Lo B'chinas Arach V'Sheiches L'Elmus Harizeh K'may Seichel Hamatzumtzum Shalom Mashpia Shehu Lefi Arach HaMakabel. So and just like we understand the relationship between Havaya and Elikim, this is why we really went into the depths on this analogy beforehand of the teacher and the student, and the student's capacity to understand and to appreciate that which the teacher is teaching, right? And the student's capacity to grasp the concise form of the concept, and then do the work himself to understand it, to flush it out more, and to understand it more robustly and more deeply. So this light, in the metaphor, what we're saying is the teacher takes the concept and expresses it in a brief, concise form, like we spoke about with the Mishnah, right? And in its brevity, in its concise state, the essence, or at least maybe a better way, is the baseline of the concept of the information is shared, and there is the opportunity for further exploration to delve deeper, but it is the baseline of the concept that is shared. So too, when it comes to the relationship between Havaya and Elikim, the concealment that takes place, the mechanics of Elikim, of the concealer, is to engage with only the external part of the expression, which is that the light becomes contained in a way, the infinite expression now is contained in a way that there is a relationship towards finitude, which ultimately facilitates there being a finite world, right? This is something that we mentioned, I'm sure we've probably mentioned before. I had a rabbi in yeshiva who used to say that ultimately there is no difference between Chachma of Atzilus, which is the first sphera, which is we conceive of as being the most godly out of this entire expanse of creation, being the most aligned with God's essence, in some ways the most infinite and the most attuned. And there's no difference between that, Chachma of Atzilus, and a moldy tuna sandwich. That they're all the same when it comes to, from God's perspective, whether high or low or lofty or less lofty, it's all within the expanse of creation. It's all a creation, and therefore it's fundamentally limited, even if it presents to us as infinite, right? In this entire expanse, every experience is that what seems higher is more aligned and what's lower seems less aligned, right? Seems more physical, seems more limited. No matter where we find ourselves on the map of the four worlds of existence, of getting out of ourselves, right? There is always we perceive this directionality of things being more aligned, more attuned, more integrated, and less aligned, right? Less attuned. But ultimately, it's all one and the same. So because of that, as soon as there is these two processes of Havaya and Elikim that come together, as soon as that begins to take place, so then there is automatically an orientation, a relationship for there to be finitude. This is where the capacity for finitude takes place. That it allows for the light to extend, for God's expression to extend out, to descend into there being a limited expression. You have a question?
Yeah, but does that then disconnect people from the world? Like say, for example, the one of us that are in their own world and maybe in that state of consciousness, but they no longer correlate up.
Does what do that? So this is the way in which we get from an infinite essence to a finite world, right? So we have to conceive of it in a linear way, and even though there's no time or space when we're talking about God, right? So, but we conceive of it linearly to say that there is first God's essence, which is infinite, and his expression, which is infinite, and then these processes at play to then create the room for there to be a finite experience. The finite experience is our own limited experience. It's the entire universe is being finite. It is beyond the universe. It is three other spiritual realms, also like the constellations and all things of that nature as well, all found within the limited experience of finitude. So there are certain people who are less oriented towards the physical world, and they might exist on different planes, and so people with mental illness might be experiencing things like that. I know the Rebbe famously said that when it comes to people with autism, a lot of times we perceive them as being unable to socialize, right? It's sort of a hallmark of autism. But that the Rebbe was really adamant that even though they might have difficulty socializing with people, they in no ways have any lack, and then sometimes in a lot of ways can have an even more robust relationship with God than quote unquote normal people are capable of.
So I put that into my question, by having this primary experience, do you then kind of disconnect from the material?
So I think each one of us is navigating this for ourselves. And ultimately, the purpose of Judaism, the purpose of the system of Torah and mitzvot is learning how to be within the world and orient our perspective upwards, right? It says, we say every day, Shema Yisrael, to affirm our belief and our acknowledgement in one God. And we're told that Shema, which means to meditate or reflect, is also an acronym for the words of Isaiah, Se'u Mari Meinechem. Lift, it literally means lift up your eyes, but it means elevate your perspective. So in as much as we are here in this physical world and we live a finite life, and nobody's here to say that the physical world doesn't exist and that the finite, the rules of finitude are very real. But there is a consciousness that we can inculcate that transcends the limitations of this physical world. It's fun. I was actually thinking about it today. There's a story I heard. There was a chassid who was, he was in 775 ringing, and he was talking about how when you say ow, the moment that you say ow, you're doubting God's existence. That anytime a person says ow, it's like at that moment, there's like you're just feeling yourself a little more than you're feeling God. And the guy who was telling the story said that he was like a young person telling the story was like a young kid at the time this happened. They were sitting in 775 bringing, and the guy who was saying this had his hand out on the table like this, and the guy sitting next to him was singing a niggin, was singing a very lively melody and was drunk, and he was taking a glass bottle and banging it on the table, and he banged it right on his hand. As he was saying this whole thing, that if you say that the moment that you say ow, it's like you're like doubting God. And he said that he watched this whole thing happen, and he just took his hand and put it under the table, and he didn't even stop talking. That there is the system of learning Torah, of doing mitzvahs, of the meditations that are taught in these discourses, and learning how to think about God, making God more real for ourselves, is all a process of learning how to maybe feel our physical existence just a little bit less. And when we do that, we have, I think, a lot more strength than we sometimes let ourselves believe. We have a lot more wherewithal and fortitude to transcend challenging moments and hang tight to the infinity of God Almighty. Okay. This seems like a good place to stop. We'll hold it over here. To say that, and this is, I think, an important caveat to always mention when we learn this stuff, which is that we go deep into the weeds of exploring Havaya versus Elikim and distinguishing and juxtaposing and all these different things. But it's important to always remember that, in the essence of what we're doing and in the essence of how we relate to our Judaism and relate to our Creator, there's one God, and there is and Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. It's all one, and it's all God, and we don't we explore the differences and the juxtapositions to enrich our understanding, but we ultimately always go back towards the singularity. We emphasize the singularity because that is the essence of what Judaism is about, and the essence of what the Torah is about. So, let's not, as much as this is interesting and important information to have, let's not lose sight of the ultimate, which is our relationship with God Almighty in a pure and singular sense. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.
Have a great week.